Sometimes in life, we have to put on a mask, and I don't mean in terms of pretending to be something that we're not, but more in terms of just not wearing our private troubles openly. But that doesn't necessarily mean that our lives need to pause. And in most cases, we simply cannot afford to drop all of our responsibilities. And this idea of not wearing your problems on your sleeves is a key theme for our subject today, because in this video, we're looking at the most interesting character in this game, Sareh. She has the most compelling storyline, the most well-developed and interesting character traits, and a couple of genuinely gut-twisting scenes that are excellently written. So if you stick around and watch this video, then you'll quickly begin to see why I saved making this video to be the thrilling conclusion to our Analysing Tacoma series.
All right, Minnie. Ready to start docking sequence?
Okay. Engaging retro thrusters now.
Welcome to the Art of Solomon. I am Solomon, and this is Analysing Tacoma, the series in which I do a deep dive and character analysis into the characters of Fullbright Entertainment's 2017 game, Tacoma. And today, in our final episode, we're going to be looking at what I think is the game's best character. Medical Officer Dr. Sareh Maddie. We're going to be looking into her role in the game's narrative, pick apart her character, and then finally have a look at some of the interesting tidbits and trivia that I found whilst making this video and playing the game. So without further ado, let's begin by looking at her role in the plot. Just to reiterate, if you skip past the past disclaimers, this video contains spoilers for both the webcomic and the ending of the game, so if you'd like to experience these before watching the video, then please click away now. September 2nd, 2085, Sareh is working as a surgeon on the Fountain of Paradise, a space station owned by the Venturius Corporation, also known as VT. On this day, a patient of hers, named Jaden Jeremiah Pratt, dies in her care. However, the circumstances of his death are suspicious. He was admitted into surgery after fracturing his femur, and although this is a serious medical emergency, it is also very treatable, even today. When you consider that Jaden was young, he was on a futuristic space station and would have been into surgery almost immediately, you begin to see why it was so unlikely that he should have died during surgery. These circumstances prompted an independent investigation. However, the results were inconclusive and unable to say who was responsible for the death. Sareh claimed that the death was caused by the station's AI, Hacker. She claimed that the AI malfunctioned during the surgery. VT, on the other hand, blamed Sareh and claimed that the death was caused by her human error. With the investigation being inconclusive, no action by either side could really be taken. The incident would end with VT paying Pratt's family an undisclosed settlement, and Sareh was transferred off station. 3 years later, and the events of the game take place. You play as Amy Ferrier, the game's mostly silent protagonist. You are an AI network specialist and have been employed by VT to travel to the lunar transfer station Tacoma and recover the station's AI named Odin. A few days before you arrive, an accident results in the crew being evacuated. This leaves you with the freedom to explore the station without consequence. Additionally, the station has been keeping records of the crew's activity and has stored them as an augmented reality recording that you can interact with. This physical exploration and the augmented reality recordings is how this game tells its story. A year before you arrive, Sareh is transferred onto the Tacoma station to serve as its only medical officer. You can find an AR recording of Sareh in her cabin. As an aside, this is my favourite vignette in the game. This scene takes place 3 months before the player arrives on the station. Sareh appears to be laying in bed, reading silently. However, by accessing her private AR display, this being the equivalent of going through someone's phone, you realise that there is a lot more going on here. She's reading the blog feed of JJ Pratt, the boy who died in her care on the Fountain of Paradise, with the feed still being updated by his friends and family. She's also having two conversations, one with Odin and the other with Nat, another crew member. She asked them both for information on Heka, the AI that Sareh believes malfunctioned during her operation. However, both conversations are inconclusive, leaving her to scroll through Pratt's blog feed in silence. I really do like this scene, and I'll be coming back to it in the analysis section of this video, but until then, we must move on. Her next appearance jumps forward in time, occurring just 4 days before Amy arrives on the station. Sareh is exercising and having a chat with Odin at the same time.
This I learned, that people do not always want what they believe they want.
Yeah.
I believe I have learned a great deal.
Really? Like what?
Very early in my source's cognitive record, I recall an intense period of personal growth. I was tasked with internalizing the behavioral idiosyncrasies of an individual to which my operator was emotionally attached.
Huh.
I expanded my capabilities to faithfully recreate her procedural reasoning, vocal attributes, and other qualities. After months of effort, I gave my operator precisely what was asked of me. A perfect emulation of the target personality, accurate in every detail.
Wow.
To my befuddlement, he did not react in a positive way. Our relationship began to deteriorate irreparably. We never again spoke personally in the manner I had become accustomed to.
Man, your stories aren't usually such
We're not all
downers.
gonna get cancer or bone disease.
Is everything
or...
okay?
I suppose I am preoccupied with
would it make
your
you feel better to
potential
hear it straight from the
departure.
station, Doctor?
Wait,
Okay.
you
hold
mean
on.
me? Or
Hey, Sarah, can I bother you for a second?
what? Oh,
Sareh is surprised by this,
what?
but they are interrupted by Andrew before the conversation can go any further. The next scene takes place a day later, so we're now at 3 days before Amy arrives on the station. Sareh is talking to Evie, essentially the station's manager, and discussing whether they'll miss the station if they're transferred off it. All of their contracts are up for renewal, and it is very common for VT to move people around its postings every year. Sareh then remembers that today is Obsolescence Day. This is essentially a party which has to be planned by the station's AI, which is Odin in this case. Odin has given everybody a job to do, however, he has curiously not given Sareh a task, prompting Evie to make a joke about Odin picking favourites. The pair will then leave, presumably to finish doing that paperwork. As an aside, at some point between this scene ending and the party beginning, the crew will have a meeting where Evie will reveal that the entire crew has indeed been renewed, setting up the storyline's final act, as you'll soon see. The time between this scene and Sarah's next scene is detailed in the game's companion comic. Sareh arrives at the party and asks everybody if she can help at all, but they all decline, leaving her feeling like a bit of a spare part. Odin then appears and asks her to join her for a game of pool. The joke here being that obviously Odin can't actually play pool because he has no hands. So really, him not giving her a job to do was all just a really contrived way of freeing her up for a chat. But regardless, she humours him and continues telling him a story that they weren't able to finish earlier. The next real AR scene takes place only a few minutes later, with the conversation becoming notably more personal. They start by talking about what Sareh is looking for in a partner, and then go on to essentially discuss whether Odin feels lonely, because AIs are not allowed to interact with each other. But, yet again, their conversation is cut off, dramatically in this case, by the game's inciting incident.
So what?
And so for your enjoyment tonight... Oh, what the hell was that?
Odin, what was that?
This is the accident that will eventually lead the player's character being sent to the station. Debris strikes the station, and the damage destroys their communications equipment and limits their oxygen supply. The next scene takes place only hours later. In that time, the crew is split off to brainstorm possible escape plans. Now, they have gathered to decide on what to do. The crew vote on a plan raised by Nat and Bert. The plan is to modify a cargo drone and turn it into an improvised escape pod. As there is now a finite amount of oxygen left, Evie orders everybody not involved in the retrofit, so that's everybody apart from Nat, Bert and Sarah, to enter cryosleep. Immediately after voting, Andrew, who was the last to agree, looks obviously uncomfortable and weakly excuses himself. Sarah follows him, but when she asks if he's okay, Andrew snaps at her. He thinks that the plan is crazy and would rather wait for VT to investigate the non-responding station, rather than entrust his life to a jerry-rigged escape pod. Sarah tries to reassure him, but he just lashes out angrily and is needlessly aggressive throughout the whole interaction. He even accuses Sarah and everybody else of pressuring him into the vote, which isn't true and is just part of Andrew's lack of backbone, but I've already covered that in a previous video. Nevertheless, this puts Sarah in a tricky situation. Andrew's fear is understandable, but the crew have already established that they will certainly run out of oxygen before VT investigate. Additionally, the cargo drone plan relies on Andrew, who serves as the station's botanist, to temporarily increase the station's algae production. So Andrew not playing ball could derail the entire plan. And there's also the fact that he and Sarah are friends. If she goes straight to Evie and tells her about Andrew's U-turn, it's likely that Evie will have absolutely no patience for him and will just order everybody to gang up and throw him into cryo, whether he liked it or not, an experience that Sarah doesn't really want to put him through. Luckily for her though, she thinks on her feet and asks whether he would show up if she called the crew in for a pre-cryo medical check. This would give Andrew space to reflect on his position and would also give her another chance to talk to him once he's a bit calmer. Andrew half accepts and Sarah leaves to find Evie. Unfortunately though, she doesn't get very far before she begins to have breathing difficulties. She manages to get herself into the food supply room before she develops into a full anxiety attack. She calls Odin for help and he leads her in a meditation exercise. With Odin's help, Sarah is able to recover just in time to catch up with Evie and Clive.
I don't know what's going to happen to us, Odin.
Sarah.
I am striding forward confidently upon my appointed path. Wherever it takes me is where I am meant to be. I am striding confidently on my appointed path.
Sarah,
Yes, Odin?
are you going to be all right?
I think so. Oh, Evie. Do you think you could get everyone to medical? I want to make sure that...
The next scene takes place a day later, so this is now only 2 days before Amy's arrival. Sarah has been finishing giving Nat and Bert a medical check, just in case the plan fails and they have to enter cryo. She tells them that they're both fine, but this is a lie. She briefly speaks to Odin, expressing just how conflicted she feels about lying to them. If you spend time to explore the area and find the necessary passcodes, you can unlock the crew's medical scan records and find out exactly what is wrong with Nat. She has a heart murmur, with a medical scan giving her an 18% chance of surviving cryo. It's worth mentioning that in this sci-fi setting, cryo sleep is not a sort of magical time-stopping device like we see in franchises like Star Wars, Fallout, Alien or Halo, but instead, cryosleep is essentially a controlled hypothermic coma, designed to slow the body's functions and preserve oxygen. Because of this, and much like in real life, a patient with pre-existing cardiovascular issues would be far more likely to face complications during such a procedure. In short, Sareh has told Nat that she is fine to enter cryo, despite knowing that there is an 80% chance that she will die. Her thoughts are cut short though when Andrew arrives for his own exam. The two characters talk, and the exchange is interesting because rather than talk about the plan or the cargo drone, which is obviously what Sareh expected him to discuss, Andrew instead wants to talk about the process of entering cryo, specifically what it will be like if they die inside.
I mean, what if things don't work out? And we're still stuck in cryo?
Oh. Well, when you go into stabilizing sleep, it feels just like any other sleep, really. The body effectively goes into a controlled hypothermic coma.
Do you dream?
Sometimes. Sometimes very intense dreams.
And then what?
After a certain amount of time, your body slows down too much, things start putting down, just don't wake back up.
It doesn't hurt.
No.
I've covered Andrew's thoughts in this scene in a previous video, so I won't go over the details too much here, but essentially, Andrew's tantrum earlier was more to do with his fear of death than anything Sareh did to him. So he quickly agrees to let her examine him and agrees to take part in the plan. A day passes between the next scene, and we're up to 18 hours before Amy's arrival. Nat, Bert and Sareh are the only 3 crew members awake at this point, with everybody else already in cryo. The couple are working on the drone whilst Sareh is also in mechanical, presumably helping where she can. She is still struggling with her decision to withhold information from Nat and briefly talks it through with Odin. Odin suggests that she made the right decision, but also reminds her that eventually she might need to order Nat into cryo, and soon. As an aside, you can look through her AR records to find a letter she has drafted to her Medical Oversight Council, essentially explaining her decision to lie to Nat in a formal sense. The conversation is again, however, interrupted when the cargo drone malfunctions, causing an explosion that seriously injures both Nat and Bert.
Power cell showing green. How's yours look, baby? Voltage adapter in place. Ready to rock. Hit it.
The explosion essentially takes the couple out of action. With only 2 technical specialists injured, the drone plan is all but guaranteed to fail. The AR recording then skips forward in time by about 20 minutes. Sareh has left Nat and Bert to themselves for a while to get over the shock. Odin then prompts Sareh and asks her what she plans to do next. Sareh tells him that really, she has no choice. She will order Nat and Bert into cryo and then join them, where they'll either be rescued in time or most likely just die. And this is where things get interesting. Unable to bypass his programming and actually tell Sareh what he wants to say, Odin has to instead cryptically tell her to investigate his AI compartment in the network technology module. Sareh goes into the module, leading to a funny scene where Odin opens the sealed door for her, but still has to advise her that entering is illegal.
You're there? You're gonna need a crowbar or something.
No, it's open. It's just hanging open.
What?
I must inform you that Ventura's regulations forbid contracting crew members direct access to AI hardware. But I cannot prevent you from proceeding.
Sareh enters and finds herself in Odin's secure communications and wetware module. Within, Odin pulls up some of his communication records on the displays, allowing Sareh to read them, even though, again, he has to circumvent his own programming and explain to her that even though he's pulled them up, she has to read them on their own accord, rather than him just explaining the situation to her. Interestingly, this is actually the same room where Amy, that is the player, has to come to finally retrieve Odin at the end of the game. And this information is still on the screens because these screens are not connected to anybody's AR display, including the players, which means that they are being generated in real time. And if you can't see already where I'm going with this, what I'm trying to say is that Odin is currently purposely letting Amy know in real time what he also let Sareh know before she evacuated. The entire Tacoma incident was a setup. Venturis had very recently almost completed a massive building project to build an enormous unmanned resort. However, they also lost a legal battle to operate unmanned space stations, and instead, another law, the Human Oversight Accord, came into effect, which essentially requires any AI-manned space stations to have at least one human on board at all times. And that one human needs to have a few other staff members on board to support them during long postings. This is what the whole Obsolescence Day celebration was about earlier, and it's also why the Tacoma, a station that realistically runs automatically and only exists to refuel passing ships, has a relatively massive crew of 6 people. VT's solution was to stage a catastrophic accident and manipulate events to place the blame on human error, and then use the incident to lobby for a legal change. To do this, they sent secret instructions to Odin and forced him to detonate the station's oxygen tanks, disable the station's communications equipment, and then lie to the crew so that they would die. Ultimately, the Tacoma crew were considered expendable, especially Sareh, as VT was likely still furious at her for not taking the blame for JJ Pratt's death. This is why all of their contracts were mysteriously renewed at the beginning of the game. But what VT didn't account for was that Odin, who had by this point become quite close to Sareh, would find a way to both obey his instructions and inform Sareh of the truth. Because from this room, she was able to manually reactivate the station's communications and call for rescue. Sarah's final appearance takes place back where we first met her, in the station's central arm. Her call for rescue was answered by the Resplendence, a cruise ship owned by a rival company. The Resplendence will take the crew to Jupiter, along with the rest of its passengers, allowing them to hide from VT, a company that they've just exposed for attempted murder. Sareh oversees everybody's revival from cryosleep, and once she gives Evie and Clive the all clear, she asks them what VT will likely do to Odin. Evie informs her that they'll most likely recover him and do a factory reset, deleting all his memories and character, essentially killing him. Sareh tells Odin that she won't let that happen and goes on to contact Cluey Dog. Let me explain. Throughout the game, Nat has been in contact with one of her friends named Hassan, who goes by the moniker Cluey Dog online. Hassan lives on another space station called Tangiers. Tangiers is special because it isn't owned by an evil megacorporation, or at least its owners are unknown to us. Nat describes the place as full of hippies, hackers, and AI rights activists. And Nat has given Sareh Hassan's information, originally in what looks like an attempt to set the two up on a date. However, Sareh instead calls in Hassan to ask for a favour that directly leads into the game's ending, as you're about to see. Because you, yes you, Amy Ferrier, were only pretending to work for VT. You are actually an undercover AI rights activist based on Tangiers all along, and were only sent to the station as a result of Sareh contacting Hassan.
Hosted AI? Online.
Odin, can you hear me?
I can.
Odin, you are now aboard an AI Liberation Front vessel. The AILF recognizes you as a sentient consciousness worthy of protection and respect. We believe that your safety and autonomy are in grave danger if you remain in the possession of the Venturas Corporation. I have been sent to offer you political asylum aboard the Tangier Sovereign Orbital Platform. Do you accept?
Considering the alternative, I would say that I do.
Okay, buddy. Here we go.
For most of the characters on board, the Tacoma station represents a bit of a halfway house, or limbo, with nobody really wanting to remain on the station, but are rather putting up with the posting for their own reasons. Nat and Bert are saving for a house, Andrew's trying to fund his son's college tuition, and Clive and Evie are using it as a career opportunity. But what about Sarah? Why is she here, and what does she want out of the Tacoma? Well, Sarah is unique in that she was forced into the position largely as a punishment. Venturas are not happy that she wouldn't take the blame for JJ Pratt's death, even though, thanks to Nat's digging, we know that they are clearly to blame. Remember in that vignette, Sarah asked Nat to find reports about Heka around the time of JJ Pratt's death? Well, if you go into the AI module and look at Nat's messages, you can see that she did indeed find something. One of Heka's technicians had tried to report a serious problem, having noticed that Heka's ability to act competently and make sound judgments had deteriorated across the board. However, this request was dismissed by HQ. The report also includes a graph showing that Heka began to deteriorate rapidly in the months just before JJ's death, and then rapidly increase afterwards. This not only proves to Sarah that Heka was indeed malfunctioning, but also at the same time, this indicates that VT had likely become complacent with regards to Heka's maintenance, and then quickly rectified their mistakes once their negligence caused JJ Pratt's death. This would also explain why they were so keen to get Sarah to take the fall, lest their mistakes become public. They went so far as to sink her career as punishment and then constantly bribe her to confess her wrongdoing. Sarah would have received this information about a year before Amy Ferrier arrives on the station, so she clearly hasn't tried to expose the company yet. And this is likely out of fear. After all, VT is clearly capable and willing to murder its staff. So she's just been living and working as the only person who really knows the full story of what happened on the Fountain of Paradise. I want you to think about her situation for a moment. Sarah is a qualified surgeon and was good enough to work at one of Venturas' flagship space stations. And now she's on the Tacoma. The Tacoma is a refueling station with 6 crew members. The role of its medical officer doesn't need someone with her qualifications. And this is something that VT essentially admits to. Whenever they continuously try to bribe her, they remind her that if she just changes her statement, then not only will they pay her more, but she'll get new work opportunities. But unfortunately for Sarah, even quitting isn't an option, as changing employer in this sort of economy is essentially career suicide. See my video on Clive for more information on that. Sarah is very much the victim of her situation. She worked as a competent surgeon, she was honest in the face of a death under her care, and simply because she wouldn't lie or take a bribe, she ended up on the Tacoma. But Sarah never behaves like a victim. In fact, it's unlikely that the rest of the crew truly realise just how much weight she is carrying. But nevertheless, she indeed is carrying a heavy laden of guilt on her shoulders. with the events on the Fountain of Paradise leaving its scars. Having a patient under her care die in what was essentially a non-life-threatening situation has shaken Sareh, and we can see this in a few ways. Going back to her vignette, she's going through the Instagram essentially of JJ Pratt and looking at images of him at his best, which is something that's probably torturing her. I'm not certain that we can call this self-harm, so I'm not going to, but do notice how she's reading the feed, alone, in her bed, her safest of safe spaces, so to speak. And she never mentions this habit to anyone, ever. In fact, Sareh is completely silent even in this vignette. So it seems to me that at best, this behaviour is a guilty habit which Sareh keeps to herself. An unhealthy habit that feeds her guilt and constantly reminds her of exactly who it was who died in her care. But what is this behaviour at its worst? Is it feeding herself feelings of guilt that she doesn't deserve? Who knows? But what it definitely does show us is just how deeply this event has affected Sareh. There are more behaviours though. She has kept newspaper clippings from the event, again hidden in a locked medical cabinet that only she has access to. Do you see where I'm going with this? The trauma of this event has also bred guilt within Sareh, and she admits this herself. You can go through her desk and uncover her private journal. On 20th of February, so a little over a week before the Tacoma incident, she says, "Honestly, most of the pain has faded, but I can't say that I still don't feel guilty. It's just duller than it used to be, but it's still there all the time." Odin says this counts as grief, even though I never knew the patient when he was alive. I don't know how doctors deal with this. A lot of them have to, don't they? Most of them. Sarah's guilt, however, isn't the only symptom of her trauma, because unfortunately, this guilt has also come with shame. Shame is never vocalized by any character in the game, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest that Sareh feels very ashamed of her situation, even though much of it was out of her control. We know that her relationship with her parents has become strained, with their communication often being loving, but also tense and also almost overly formal. In the companion comic Sweet to Ask, we see Sareh just finishing a call with her parents and being so upset that Odin feels like he needs to comment on it. You can also read letters her parents sent her, sending her their love during Ramadan and reminding her that she should let herself relax every now and again. And this might be me reading too far into this, but I do think that there is a kind of tangible sadness to this letter as well, as if this letter was sent instead of a warm conversation. And this leads me to wonder whether Sareh has actually told her parents the full story of what happened to JJ Pratt. They would obviously know that he died and died in her care, and they would know that VT reassigned her. But they might not know that VT has been bribing their daughter or threatening their daughter, and this could prevent them from really understanding why she hasn't quit her job. As I mentioned earlier, employment laws and politics in this setting are not like our own. One does not simply quit their job in the world of Tacoma. But it is still plausible that a disagreement occurred, with Sarah's parents wanting their daughter to get out of what is a very toxic situation, and Sareh refusing, instead re-signing with the VT and committing herself to be separated from her friends and family for at least another 12 months. But whether or not shame has anything to do with Sarah's decision making is uncertain, with that answer never being directly confirmed. However, this does lead us to an interesting point, because Sarah's parents aren't the only people left in the dark about this. Because although I believe she's told Odin, there isn't actually any evidence that she has told anybody else about what happened with JJ Pratt, or how the situation has affected her. So far I've covered that Sarah is trapped in an unfulfilling situation. Her relationships with her family and potentially friends back home are becoming strained, and she's still recovering from significant emotional trauma. But what is interesting about her character is the fact that she never shares this pain with anybody else on the station. In all of her dealings with the crew, she's either professional in her work settings or cordial in social settings. And in almost every interaction she has with anybody, she is polite, considerate, and gentle. That being said, she also doesn't volunteer much information about herself. Not in a standoffish way, but she just doesn't share much about herself. In the intro to this video, I brought up the idea that we all wear some kind of mask or have some sort of guard up that allows us to get through the day. And that we only really let that down either when we're on our own or when we're around people we really trust. Well, Sarah doesn't have anybody she can be honest with or vulnerable with, including her parents. She has nobody, with one exception. Odin is probably the only reason Sarah hasn't had a significant mental breakdown yet. Sarah and Odin have a very close and affectionate relationship, and Sarah is so much closer to him than anybody else on the station, to the extent that listening to their conversations makes her sound like a completely different character. Her dialogue loses its formality, she speaks more directly, asks more probing questions, and generally speaks in a way you would expect two friends to speak. The subject of their conversation are almost always personal too. In the gym, Odin discusses human behaviour and admits that he was disappointed when his relationship with the previous operator broke down. At the party, he and Sarah discuss her ideal partner.
So you do not know what you're looking for?
No, I just imagine. Well, I guess I just mean someone I can talk to. Someone who makes me laugh. Don't you like some people more than others?
I suppose there are some people that engage more freely with me, and I do prefer it.
In botany, Odin is the one to comfort and lead Sarah through her anxiety attack. In the comic Sweet to Ask, Odin also offers emotional help to Sarah after an upsetting call with her parents. In engineering, he gives her advice after she lies to Nat and Bert, and the point I'm trying to make is that Sarah and Odin are friends. In seeing how she behaves around him, we must therefore conclude that she is not friends with anybody else on the station, or at least not to the level of confidence with which she holds Odin. And what is sweet about this relationship is that it's not one-sided. Because Odin likewise treats Sarah as his friend too, and treats her differently to everybody else on the station, even going so far as to maneuver the Obsolescence Day party plans so that he can spend more time with her. And Odin even admits that he will miss her once he's transferred off the station. And all of this begs the question. Sarah is clearly capable of forming these kinds of relationships. So what was it about Odin that allowed her to put down her mask? Or what was it about everybody else that forced her to be so guarded? As I already said, Sarah has a cordial relationship with the rest of the crew. She gets on well with basically everybody. However, she doesn't really hold any of them in any confidence. And the exact reason for this is never verbalized. However, I do have a theory. Sarah's path ultimately is very different to everybody else's. Everybody else is on Tacoma for a reason. So they have a goal, something they are literally working towards. That could be the property, family back home, a relationship or a career, But Sarah doesn't have any of that. She really had no choice but to take the Tacoma job, so there's already a pretty big gulf in terms of how much she can relate to the rest of the crew. And this would be especially true if she also felt like a bit of an outsider because of this. And the other reason is perhaps the most simplest, but also one that I think can be overlooked. Sarah is still hurting, and there is evidence to suggest that she's not fully healed from the death of JJ Pratt. And when people are either hurting or vulnerable, it can be harder to build new, intimate relationships. The reason as to why Sarah doesn't get close with the rest of the crew could simply begin and end with because she didn't want to get closer to any of them. In terms of final thoughts, that was kind of everything I could pull about Sarah's character. So I do just want to quickly, I guess, talk about why I really liked her. I think with all the other characters on board the Tacoma station, they are pretty much what you see is what you get. They do kind of wear their character and their emotions either on their sleeve or in a pretty interesting but predictable or straightforward way, you know. We can see Clive's insecurities about his job, but he pretty much tells us what they are. Same with Evie. Nat and Bert, like you can go through Bert's, I think her phone record and see her counselling report and stuff. What was interesting about Sarah though is that she never actually verbalizes a lot of what I've put in this video. A lot of this you have to go and figure out for yourself by just seeing how she behaves around certain people over others, or I guess, you know, you have to read letters and stuff and read into them. And I just think that was such a much more interesting way of presenting the character, especially because of Tacoma's gameplay mechanics, you know, because you can walk around her room and, you know, look at her, what is basically her Instagram, and be like, oh, why the hell is she looking at this JJ Pratt guy's feed? It was just really cool. I really enjoyed it, learning about this character. I think she has obviously got more screen time. She's the only person to be in every single scene of the game pretty much, because she's the only one who stays awake and uninjured throughout the game's runtime. And yeah, it was just really cool. I guess I should also quickly talk about just this series in general. Like, I've really enjoyed making this series. It probably took much longer than it needed to. Like, I started recording my first game capture of this back in October last year, and I just loved this game. I loved the narrative, I loved the mechanics of going through all these rooms and figuring out more about these characters, and the character writing was just amazing. And I guess you could kind of say, you know, Solomon, why are you making these videos? Or made, because they're done now. And I think one thing that was quite cool about this sort of thing, and I guess with all character analysis, is that there's room for debate on certain things, and I think there's opportunities to share. So you've just listened to me make this video about Sarah, but you may have played the same game and come to different conclusions. You may have, you know, read into all of this and been like, well, she's clearly oversensitive, and why is she still, I don't know, worried about this, which is obviously very different to what I came up with. And I don't know, I thought it'd be interesting to share what I took away from these characters in this game and sort of see what other people did, what conclusions other people came to. That would be really cool. But I don't get many views. There's probably going to be like 5 people who watch this video all the way through, and that's cool, because I do enjoy ultimately making these videos too. There's a reason why I did it. There aren't many other, I don't think that actually there are any other dedicated character analysis videos on this game, which is fine. I do hope you guys enjoyed. We've got a final trivia section after this, and yeah, if you are someone who's come through and has watched the full series, you know, thank you very much. Do leave a comment if you want to. and subscribe for more things like this and for my own creative writing. And if you have any questions, let me know. But yeah, I'll move on to the trivia section, and I'll see you guys soon. It's implied that Sareh is a Muslim through her letters and conversations with her parents, as well as obviously books on her bookshelf. However, it's also suggested that she maybe has a more analytical approach to her faith, more of like a unpicking, calculating, what does this mean sort of approach than maybe a spiritual, emotional approach. There's evidence that Sareh regularly plays games with the hyper-competitive Andrew, but she always beats him really badly. There's one puzzle game, I think, in the crew lounge, and also a video game in, I think it's Andrew's cabin, and yeah, she just absolutely destroys him every time. Sareh obviously has an anxiety disorder and takes anti-anxiety medication, which you can find in her cabin. While she's exercising, she can be seen reading a fake sci-fi book called Richard Sturgeon's Zero Spiel, which seems to be about gambling and microgravity. I'm not sure if this is a reference to something, but it's kind of lost on me, so if somebody knows, please let me know in the comments. Andrew has been trying to give away some of his plants, and only Sareh took one. It's implied that Sareh exercises the most intensely and consistently out of the crew, and her wireframe AI recording is also the second largest out of the crew, with only Clive being taller. So yeah, she's pretty wham. Sareh owns several books about anxiety and wellness. She also owns some religious books, some of them again are quite analytical. Some of the real books she owns are A Handmaiden's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Sareh does yoga. In Sarah's room you can find evidence of her practicing the, I think it's pronounced the I Ching or the I Ching. And I had to look this up, but it's essentially a form of ancient Chinese psychic revelation, you know, along the same lines as star signs or palm reading. And I was kind of surprised that Sareh even bothered experimenting with this, partially because, you know, if she is Muslim, most Abrahamic religions steer very, very clear of anything to do with psychic promises. However, you know, very much in character. I assume that Sareh is engaging with these books in a very analytical way and just kind of exploring the material and seeing what she can get out of it, which I guess is really in character. In terms of the specific I Ching glyph or hexagram that she was studying, I looked up, it's called the 5HSU, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, I'm really sorry, and supposedly it relates to patience and waiting, and it reminds us that periods of inaction are a part of life and that time isn't wasted so long as we are confident in the knowledge that it will eventually end. And yeah, I guess that is really relevant to Sarah's current situation. And that's the end of the video. If you've got this far, thank you so much for watching it all the way through. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe, it helps me grow. There's also a series of Analysing Tacoma videos where you can go through and learn about all the characters in this great game, so you can watch them too if you want. Other than that, I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye bye.